So, who was the great Persian king Xerxes? I mean, was he this hot headed, megalomaniac tyrant who literally declared war on the ocean? Or was he a pious, responsible ruler just trying to continue the legacy of a massive empire? Today, we're going to dive into the completely conflicting stories that surround one of history's most fascinating and, honestly, most misunderstood figures. All right, let's kick things off with the most legendary, the most bananas story about Xerxes. Just imagine this. You've built this incredible, massive bridge of boats to march your army across the sea. But overnight, a monster storm just rips it to shreds. So what do? Well, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, Xerxes didn't just get mad. Oh no, he literally put the sea on trial.
Get this. He supposedly had his men whip the water 300 times. And then he had them throw shackles into the waves, all while they're shouting insults at the sea. For centuries, this one single act has defined Xerxes. It's become the ultimate picture of hubris, right? Of a man with so much power he actually believes he can command the elements. It is a fantastic story, and it's the absolute foundation for the popular image we have of Xerxes, the emotional, arrogant tyrant.
I mean, it's an unforgettable image, isn't it? A king whipping the ocean. But what if it's more of a caricature than a real portrait? What if there's a completely different side to this story? A version of the king told not by his enemies, but by, well, Xerxes himself. Okay, so let's press pause on the Greek storytellers for a moment and go look at how Xerxes actually wanted to be remembered. Because if you look at what's carved into the stone of his own palaces and monuments, you find a very, very different king. And wow, the contrast is it's night and day. On one side, you've got Herodotus's version, this impulsive, emotional guy driven by pure ego, a tyrant out for revenge. But then you look at the Persian inscriptions and you get a king who is measured, pious, and who believes he's favored by his god. He's not presented as a vengeful madman, but as a lawful, responsible ruler just carrying on his father's work. So, which one is the real Xerxes? This right here is Xerxes, in his own words, from an inscription at his capital, Persepolis. And notice what he hammers home again and again. By the favor of Ahura Mazda. He credits everything he does to his god. He presents himself not as some guy who defies nature, but as a humble servant working out a divine plan. This is the official story. It's all about continuity, piety, and order. You know, the total opposite of the chaotic tyrant we see in the Greek accounts. Okay, so we've got these two completely conflicting stories. The angry tyrant versus the pious king. But what does the actual physical evidence from his invasion of Greece tell us? Well, the logistics of his campaign. They build an even more complex picture. Let's start with something called the Athos Canal. Years before the invasion even began, Xerxes ordered a massive canal dug straight through a peninsula in northern Greece. Now, why would he do that? Well, first, it's just pure strategy. See, a previous Persian fleet had been totally wrecked by storms right there, and Xerxes was not about to make the same mistake twice. This was meticulous, long-term planning. But there's another reason. Carving a canal through solid land is a staggering display of power. It sends a very clear message. I'm a king who can literally reshape the earth. So this one project actually supports both stories, the careful planner and the king obsessed with showing his dominance over nature.
And that brings us right back to those bridges. Even if the story of whipping the sea is true, you have to realize that building those bridges in the first place wasn't just some whim. They were a necessary, absolutely mind-bogglingly complex solution to a huge logistical nightmare. How do you get hundreds of thousands of soldiers across a wide strait of water? It points less to some spontaneous fit of rage and way more to years of deliberate, imperial-scale planning.
But the invasion wasn't just about incredible engineering and brute force. Here's a part of Xerxes' plan that often gets totally overlooked. A really sophisticated diplomatic campaign that started long before the first soldier ever marched. So the Persians would send out heralds to all these Greek city-states with a pretty simple demand: give us earth and water. This was a well-known symbolic act of submission to the Persian Empire. The Greeks even had their own word for it, to Medize, which basically meant to side with the Medes, which was just their name for the Persians. This was conquest by intimidation and negotiation, not just by force. And here's the crucial point. It worked. Big time. Before his army even got near the Greek heartland, Xerxes had already secured the submission of key northern states like Thessaly and Boeotia.
And this wasn't just some political victory, it was a strategic masterstroke. It secured his supply lines, it isolated the big players down south like Athens and Sparta, and it basically fractured the Greek resistance before a single major battle was even fought. He was winning the war, state by state, without even drawing his sword. So how in the world do we make sense of these two completely different versions of Xerxes? The emotional tyrants on the one hand and the master strategist on the other. You can really see the split right here on this chart. Herodotus gives us this literary drama, right? His story is all about motivation, personal revenge, hubris, and his evidence is all dramatic actions and big speeches. But the logistical reality tells a different story entirely. The motivation there is cold, hard imperial strategy. And the evidence isn't a speech, it's canals, supply depots, and treaties. One is a moral tale, the other is basically the paperwork of running an empire. Ultimately, what we have are two different sources trying to do two totally different things. Herodotus wasn't trying to write an administrative history book. He was telling a gripping story about freedom versus tyranny and about the dangers of pride. The Persian inscriptions and the archaeological evidence, though, they reveal the machinery of a huge, functioning empire carrying out a very well thought out plan. So it leaves us with this really big question. When we look back at historical figures like Xerxes, are we actually seeing the person who lived? Or are we just seeing the character in a really good story that's been told and retold for millennia? It really makes you wonder, how much of history is just the story we want to hear versus the much more complicated and maybe less exciting reality of how it all actually happened?